Let us all pray together. Heavenly Father, Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Bhagavan Krishna, Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, our Guru, Paramahansaji Anandamoy, saints of all religions, we bow to you all. Beloved God, bless our service. Help us to feel thy presence. And bless us always. All our spiritual efforts. Help us to find thee in our daily meditations. In finding thee within, we shall find thee without. In all people, in all conditions. Om, peace, Amen. Please be seated. Let us sit upright and let us close our eyes and forget all outer thoughts, outer consciousness. Let us direct our attention inward and upward to the point between the eyebrows. All the great scriptures have mentioned that point. Jesus mentioned it as the single eye. It is the seat of the Christ consciousness within us. And it is there that we can contact first a deeper experience of God's consciousness, God's presence. The subject today is the art of getting along with others. Isn't that exciting? Oh. But you know, it took me a long time to understand how important this subject is. It is incredibly important. It is, I almost would say, it is as important as meditation. I have big eyes now looking at me, but it is really. If we consider why we are here, it always comes back to that. And I suppose those of you who have been here coming regularly for some time, you have heard me say that about 1,000 times. And that we are in school, that this place, this earth, is not a vacation place. And so the disciplines, the main disciplines, in order to reach our goal, which is oneness with God, the realization of oneness with God, the main discipline is meditation. And that is why Paramahansaji came with his special dispensation to bring us the techniques, Kriya Yoga. It's not enough. The next important, the way I see it, the next important discipline to reach our goal is to learn to live in harmony with other people. It's that important. Now, to the basic principle of this subject. Paramahansaji said, the greatest happiness, next to divine happiness, is to live in peace with those with whom we have to live every day of the year. This is a very powerful statement, very potent. The greatest happiness, next to divine happiness. What is divine happiness? The bliss of God. And I suppose you heard about that last Sunday, because that was the subject, if I remember correctly. Bliss of God, that is the goal. Oneness with God, oneness with infinite bliss. Now, next to that happiness is the happiness that comes by living in peace, living in harmony with those we have to live with, either in a family or work with, on a work job, or wherever we have to deal with people. Now, this gets right into the very core, the very essence of Paramahansaji's teachings. It goes into the very core of the science of yoga, the science of the teachings of Jesus Christ, teachings of Krishna, teachings of all the great ones. It goes right into the core of it. There is research, studies by sociologists, and they said the occasions that cause the most stress are not the ones commonly thought to be stress producers, such as job demands, financial problems, sickness in the family, and so on. The most upsetting occasions are interpersonal conflicts. Have you experienced that? Huh? We all have. That's how we learn, hopefully. That's how we learn. Now, the definition of yoga, you read this in the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansaji. Definition of yoga, meaning the final goal that we are reaching, that we are supposed to reach, is union with God. And that comes through stilling the waves of consciousness. And that means that the whole thing is still. That goes into deep meditation. And the mind is still, completely absorbed, completely calm, completely concentrated. And the life force is completely still and absorbed in higher chakras. When the emotions are completely calm, no ruffle, everything is still. It's exactly what it says in the Bible, in the Old Testament, be still and know that I am God. That's the only way that we can have the true experience of God. Be still. Now, can you imagine? Do you remember when you had some upset, some conflict with another person, and you tried to meditate? Didn't work. It didn't work because there is this commotion, emotional commotion going on inside, isn't it? And that is why it says in the Bible, Jesus said, before you go to worship, I'm translating that into now modern language. Before you go to worship, meaning before you go to meditation, first thing analyze and see whether you have some problem with another person. And if there is, you go there and make peace. And then you go to meditation. Because if you don't have peace inside, if there's inner commotion, if you're upset, You sit down in meditation, you cannot meditate. And when you look at the greatest commandment which is given in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, first, the highest commandment is love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. Right? Same thing is taught in the Gita. Same thing is taught in all the various scriptures of various religions. That's the highest commandment. That in one sentence is the whole principle, the whole essence of Kriya Yoga, Raja Yoga. But the next one, love thy neighbor as thyself, is of equal importance. Isn't it amazing? And then Jesus said, on these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. That's the essence. That's the basic discipline that we have to consider. So, if we really understand what life is all about, that the goal of life is God realization. And we really want that. It takes a while to really understand that and really want that, isn't it? But once we understand why we are here and what the purpose is, these are the most essential disciplines. The one is meditation. The other one is to live in harmony with other people. It's that important. Well, with that, I really have covered the subject. But you don't want to go home yet? So, I'll go a little bit more into it. You know, there are many rules, of course. It's a very complex subject of how to do it and all that sort of thing. But if you keep in mind what the purpose of it all is and how we have to learn to get along with others. And, you know, not everybody in this world is on the same level of understanding and behavior. And so you come in contact with people who are somewhat, shall I say, off. And some of them are really badly off. And so it's very difficult to always be in peace and always get along. And even with devotees, I'll talk about that too. So I want to read a letter that was written some time ago by Dayamata, our president. She said, our daily associations with people play an important part in our quest for God. And there it comes again. They see the relationship between our dealing with people and the goal of God realization. Sometimes devotees, she said, sometimes devotees feel they would find God more easily if they lived in undisturbed solitude. But it is very difficult to find God by yourself. Why? Because wherever you go, you take all your limitations and your habits and your moods. And when there is no opposition, there is no impetus to change. Unchallenged, the ego reigns supreme, and you remain the same. And generally, it is only through our daily interaction with others that character flaws are exposed. Our undesirable traits meet with resistance or are heightened by trying circumstances. We are then forced to recognize and overcome our imperfections. And being thrown in with many different personalities serves like a pumice to rub away the delusion encrusting our souls. The necessity to adjust and improve hastens our spiritual growth. Now, this is always, of course, conditioned by whether we are willing to change. Usually the attitude is everybody else has to change. I'm okay. And as long as we have that attitude, we are not going to change. We have to change, regardless of the other people. And then she said, it is not possible to be happy in the narrow confines of a self-centered existence. To live in peace and harmony in this world, we have to be thoughtful of others. This is the main key, to be thoughtful of others. And when we are, we open the doors to greater understanding and fulfillment. We have been placed here to reunite with God, to get beyond duality by loving Him unconditionally. And now, whether a person's behavior is good or bad, friendly or unfriendly, his soul is still essentially a part of God. God is just behind every finite form. The devotee who ceases to think of self and endeavors only to please God, beholding Him in all, swiftly reaches His eternal embrace. And here we have another thought. First one is to be thoughtful of others. The other thought is beholding Him in all, meaning, as it says in the Gita, God speaking, I am the self in all beings. That's another thought which helps. So, the whole thing is a very interesting subject, isn't it? And it's a hard subject, maybe, to learn to get along with everybody, even with devotees. Even here in a temple, you come here for services, you come here for meditations, and once in a while we have some special event, some social thing, like we had the banquet the other day. This is not just to have socials. Maybe you have noticed that. Maybe you have not noticed that. This is also spiritual training. This is now not just a spiritual training in meditation and listening to Master's teachings, but to learn to get along with others. Now, when we had the banquet, for instance, maybe you were not aware of it. There were about 60 people involved to put that banquet on. You realize that? And in planning, making the decorations, cooking the food and serving and the whole setup and then cleaning afterwards and all that sort of thing, about 60 people. And they did a wonderful job. But it is training. It is training of the devotees. And even though they are devotees, the Master used to say, I do not attract weaklings. I attract strong people. Now, if you have a couple strong people and they have different opinions about how a thing should be done, most likely sparks fly, right? And so we have to understand, we have to give in a little bit. It has to be give and take. And there has to be harmony, because that's the most important thing. It is spiritual training. When you come here, when we have some special event, or when you come here as we had yesterday, and helping, serving here at the temple, and maintenance and cleaning and all that sort of thing, it's all spiritual training. All spiritual training. It's all part of it. Now, we talked sometimes about people who had the experience of what they call near-death experience, clinical death, person who died, left the body and was revived again, came back. Some of them had, usually it doesn't happen that way, but some of them had some deeper insight through that experience, that they had a glimpse of a larger perspective. And they saw what is involved in certain relationships they have in this life now. There was one man who said, my father and I have been working on this relationship in several past lives, and we have still not cleaned it up. Another one said, my mother was my mother in a past life, and I didn't like her then either. And another one said my father was a person in a past life whom I treated cruelly. And so this is a very interesting thing because, those that are close to us, that we love is a very powerful magnet. Automatically, we are drawn again together in the future if we have to come back. But if there is trouble with another person, and we have not learned our lesson yet, those people are drawn to us again in order for us to learn. We may not be able to straighten out the other person. That is not our job. Our job is that we learn. And when we have learned our lessons, then we are free to go. So both is necessary. It is not just a deep desire for God and a deep love for God and meditation. The other one is also the necessity to learn how to get along, how to live in peace with other people. And so, we have to learn. I want to read to you, this is from a family counselor who conducted a weekend workshop for a group of married people who had trouble with their marriages. And he wrote afterwards, during that workshop, I heard one of the members, man, state that the purpose and function of his wife was to keep their home neat and him well fed. And he said, I was aghast at what seemed to me his painfully blatant chauvinism. I thought I might demonstrate this to him by asking the other members of the group to state how they perceived the purpose and function of their spouses. To my horror, the others, male and female alike, gave very similar answers. All of them defined the purpose and function of their husbands or wives in reference to themselves. All of them failed to perceive that their mates might have an existence basically separate from their own, or any kind of destiny apart from their marriage. Isn't that amazing? And the Master said to us, many times in his services, he said, God has given us family in order to overcome selfishness, to include others, not to think of just self, but to think of what is best for the other person. How can I help? How to be thoughtful. And so then the family counselor said, good grief, I explained, it's no wonder that you all have difficulties with your marriages. And the group not only felt chastised, but profoundly confused by what I said. And somewhat belligerently, they asked me to define the purpose and function of my wife. And I said the purpose and function of her is to grow to be the most in which she is capable, not for my benefit, but for her own. And so this is what the Master says, we have to learn to think of others, to be thoughtful of others. And here's another point now. Paramahansaji said, a man who cannot get along with others is one who does not get along with himself. Now sometimes I have seen people who may have difficulties personally and be very loving, very kind to others. But generally speaking, it is when we are down in the dumps, we see everything wrong. And just the other day, I had a talk with one of the young novices. And he asked me, he said, if I see something wrong in another monk, is it okay for me to tell him what's wrong? I said, well, it's better to leave this up to his counselor. He said, yeah, but if I see something wrong, I really feel like telling him. I said, why don't you send a note to his counselor. Then I told him a story. I said there were a couple of monks who went to the master complaining about another one. And master patiently listened. And when they were finished, he said, change yourself. And then the monk said, it is true. When I feel good, everything is okay. And when I'm down, I want to criticize everybody. I said, yes, that is a reflection of your own consciousness. And so the basic thing is we have to work on ourselves. There was a couple, they had been married for 20 years, and finally they came to the conclusion they could not live together anymore. They had to get a divorce. So they went to a professional counselor, not to get any counseling for marriage because they had decided to divorce, but they wanted him to help them to get through the divorce so that it would be easier. And he listened to them and he said, now I want you to go home. And both of you ask yourself, what is it like to be married to me? And he said, well, we don't want to do that. We have already decided we cannot live together anymore. We have to get a divorce. And he said, no, you go home and you ask that question. So reluctantly, they said, all right, we'll do that. And they did. What it is like to be married to me. And they both came to the conclusion, I have to change. And they really recognize, I have to change. I have work to do on myself. And after some time, that counselor called them and said, well, what about the divorce? And they said, we don't want to get a divorce. Our marriage is getting better all the time. Now, that doesn't apply only to marriage, That can apply to the workplace and wherever we are, where we have to deal with people, asking ourselves, what is it like to be working with me? What is it like to be in my company? And really sincerely asking those questions. And the master said, this is not just for our own sake. This has to do with world conditions. It is the inner harmony of the individual human souls who comprise the various nations and the social structures in them that will bring peace to man and to this world. Now, there's another point. I come back to this again, to this basic thought, be thoughtful of others. Paramahansaji said, consideration for others is a most wonderful quality. It is the greatest attractiveness you can have. Practice it. A thoughtful person anticipates other people's needs. A considerate person, when in the company of others, will have an intuitive awareness of their needs. And that is, again, the basic thought is to go beyond being self-centered, to include others and think in terms of other people. There's a nice story about Saint Therese of Lisieux, who, in a convent, she had received some flowers and she was decorating the altar. And they were artificial flowers because there was a crabby old nun in that convent who had an allergy, and she always made a big fuss when somebody brought in fresh flowers because she said that those flowers are aggravating her allergy. And so, as St. Therese was decorating that altar, that crabby old nun came by and she just was getting ready, full force, tongue lashing to that young nun. And St. Therese immediately ran to her and said, look, sister, look at those flowers. They are artificial. isn't it wonderful that people can make such beautiful flowers? They look just like real ones. And, it's just a little story. It's just a little indication, but it is. How many people would do that? They would let that old crabby nun spill it all out and then say, ha, ha, these flowers are artificial. But she didn't. She was considerate. So that the other one wouldn't lose face. And so you never know. I remember, I never forgotten that. It was when I was, in the very beginning, when I was a minister. I was serving at the Hollywood Temple at that time. That was feels about like 600 years ago. But anyway, one day after Sunday service, a lady came to see me, and she said, I want to talk to you. I said, all right. Now, I didn't know her then, but she told me who she was, and she showed me all kinds of pamphlets and magazine articles about her. She was a movie actress. Beautiful woman, proud, arrogant as can be. I thought, why does she come to see me? And then she talked about the big projects that she was going to work on and all that sort of thing. I. And I thought, listen, what is this? And so then I cracked open that shell. I wanted to see what's behind it. And I had the surprise of my life. She said, I am only human. And everybody comes to me for help, for encouragement, for support. And nobody thinks about me. And she said, I am a very lonely person. And I'm only human. I have nobody that I can talk to. And then she broke down and cried like a baby. And so it is, we are judging very often, we are judging people by the outer shell, isn't it? And we have to feel, that's where the Master says, intuitive awareness of others, of their needs. And very often you'll find that people who really have a shell of security and have it all made and all that sort of thing. And it's not that way at all. You just feel, just think, it doesn't even have to be talk, It can be just a good thought, just a prayer, a simple prayer, just visualizing the person to be in the light of God. That helps. It helps them. It helps us. Now, I want to tell you what Paramahansaji, what instructions he gave to one of the nuns, Miramata at that time. In the 40s, he started a little cafe in Encinitas, and it was right there at the highway. That main road there now, that used to be the highway. And he did this in order to get people acquainted with the teaching because they had free literature on the table. And he also wanted to show people that they won't die if they don't have meat every day, twice or three times. So instead of having hamburgers, he introduced mushroom burgers. And in those days, we didn't have many people who were willing to serve, to work. And so this is the instruction that the Master gave to Miramata, who was in charge of those few people who were serving there. He said, work with their virtues and with the best they have within them. Expect nothing. Isn't it amazing? Expect nothing from them. But be grateful for all they do and all they give. And that's a Master speaking. Expect nothing, but work with their good points, work with their virtues, and be grateful for everything they do. And that is, that is the perfection of a master. And it is exactly like that. Remember the story in the autobiography of a yogi when the master was a young boy, and he had been just a few months in the hermitage of Yukteswar, and then he left. He wanted to go to the Himalayas, and then a few days later he came back and he said to Yukteswar, I expected you to be angry because I left, and I left all my duties and so on. And Sri Yukteswar said, no, I'm not angry. I do not expect anything from others. Therefore, their actions cannot be contrary to wishes of mine. I'm only happy in your own true happiness. Same thing. Same thing. And that's hard. But that is going beyond the ego, including others, thinking about others, expecting nothing but giving. And I have seen this, how people are bringing that attitude, their attitude towards other people, into their relationship with God. And I've seen it again and again and again. And people are saying, I want this, I want that, give me this, give me that. But eventually we have to change, we have to turn it around, isn't it? Because there was a saint who said to begin the spiritual path with a resolution to walk in the way of the cross. From the very first, and not to desire any sweetness at all, meaning no consolations, no big experiences and all that sort of thing. Such a person has nothing to fear. Because there is the visible beginning of a love for God, utterly divested of all self-interest. And that is, again, the ego is gone. You give, you make the effort, and you're wide open then for His grace and for His blessings to come. Wide open. So many times I have seen this in meditation, people are thinking in terms of what do I get, isn't it? And the whole concentration is on self. And then we get exactly what we are concentrating on, namely ego consciousness. Nothing more. And so you see it from this now. The greatest discipline is meditation, and that means meditation. That means concentration on God, not asking for anything. And the other discipline is how to get along with others, meaning becoming unselfish, thinking of the other person, peace, and overcoming selfishness. And that the moment we have achieved that, we are getting our diploma, and we have passed school. Finished. You can go home. So this is a wonderful subject, to think about it and to keep in mind and to practice. Because, as I said, it is intimately linked to the path of God. Intimately linked. And let us pray, beloved God, may Thy love shine forever on the altar of our devotion, and may we be able to awaken Thy love in all hearts. Om peace. Amen. God bless you all.